Economic Studies in English. In this lecture, we will talk about a new branch of economics, which is called welfare economics. The main points of the lecture are introduction, what is welfare economics, measuring social welfare. We knew previously that the main economic problem is that we have unlimited wants and needs, while the resources are limited, or what we called as scarcity of resources. Accordingly, what is sufficient for one person is scarce for another. On this reality, the target goal of the welfare economics is studying the proper resource allocation, or the best way of allocating our scarce resources, so we can maximize the social welfare. What do we mean by social welfare? It means the well-being of the entire society. Does the social welfare is the same as the standard of living? Social welfare is not the same as the standard of living, as it is concerned with the quality of life, which includes the quality of the environment, such as air, soil, and water, the level of crime, the availability of essential social services, the availability of religious and spiritual aspects of life. Welfare economics is a very important branch of economic theory, as it serves as a foundation to many applied branches of economics, such as public finance and the economics of government policy. It also provides the theoretical foundation for particular instruments of public economics, such as cost-benefit analysis. Welfare economics was established as a well-defined branch of economics during the 20th century. A new subfield was created, which is the combination of welfare economics and behavioral economics, and is known as behavioral welfare economics. What is welfare economics? Welfare economics is a normative branch of economics that is concerned with the way economic activity ought to be arranged, so as to maximize economic welfare. Normative means that is based on value judgments. What ought to be produced, how production should be organized, the way income and wealth ought to be distributed both now and in the future. Accordingly, welfare economics looks at how different types of economic activity and various ways of allocating scarce resources impact the social welfare. It describes the state of economics when all the members of the community are totally satisfied. It also studies how economic policies impact the prosperity of the society. Or in other words, it studies the ways of income distribution in order to achieve social good. Therefore, we can say that in order to know the social welfare, we need to take the preferences of individuals at the microeconomic level and tries to apply them in the macroeconomic levels. Measuring social welfare. How can we measure social welfare? In reality, it's impossible to establish a single economic welfare criterion for all segments of population. Why? Because social welfare is normative, as each individual in a community has a unique set of value judgments, which are dependent on his or her attitudes, religion, philosophy, politics. Accordingly, the economist has difficulty in aggregating these value judgments, in advising policymakers about decisions that affect the allocation of resources. Consequently, the basic goal of welfare economics is to develop some common ethical criteria that permit to identify and separate needs and wants, and to be used as a guide in evaluating actual resource distribution. A typical methodology begins with the attempt of Paul Samuelson to construct social welfare function that can offer guidance as to whether one economic configuration is better or worse than another. The social welfare function can be regulated by taking the preferences of each consumer and aggregate them into a community preference ordering, and then it can be used to rank economically feasible allocations of resources in terms of the social welfare they need. Such functions typically include measures of economic efficiency and equity. However, some economists have questioned whether consistent and non-contradictory community orderings are possible. Utility. Jeremy Bentham thought that welfare was equal to the sum of individuals' utilities, or to a social utility, which means that we get the utility of each individual and add them together to get the social utility. But what we mean by utility? Utility refers to the perceived value associated with a particular good or service. The perceived value is essential and relates to whether a buyer feels the amount of value received for a certain good or service is at least equal or greater than the amount of funds required to purchase it. This means that I'll not pay money for a good or service which I think that it doesn't worth that money. In addition, it suggests that a certain unit of currency, such as a dollar, has the same perceived value to an individual as it does to a corporation, regardless of how the income amounts of each entity differ. Accordingly, there are two measures of social welfare, which are cardinal utility and ordinal utility. The first measure is cardinal utility. The cardinal utility approach is offered by neoclassical economists who developed the theory of consumption based on the assumption that utility is a measurable scale of consumer satisfaction, which means that the consumer can express his satisfaction in cardinal or quantitative numbers, such as 1, 2, 3, and so on. To do so, they have introduced a hypothetical unit called utils, meaning the units of utility. Over the passage of time, it was realized that the absolute measure of utility is not possible, because it was difficult to measure the feeling of satisfaction in numbers. Also, it was difficult to quantify the factors that cause a change in the moods of the consumer, their tastes, preferences, their likes and dislikes. Therefore, the utility is not measurable in quantitative terms, but it is being used as a starting point in the consumer behavior analysis. Thus, the cardinal utility approach is used as the basis for explaining the consumer behavior, where every consumer aims at maximizing his or her utility or satisfaction for the amount of money he spends on the consumption of goods and services, and thus all his actions and doings are directed towards the utility maximization. Accordingly, the consumption theory aims at finding out the answers of the following questions. How does a consumer decide on the optimum quantity of a commodity that he or she wishes to consume? How consumers allocate their disposable incomes between several commodities of consumption such that utility is maximized?